As some of you may know, I love the mountains, and in particular, skiing. What some of you may not know, however, is that I am not a particularly good skier. Nevertheless, I continue to do so because I possess the ability to make a true fool of myself, dramatically falling on various jumps or steep runs without ever getting notably embarrassed. And my family is here, and they can likely attest to this. They are all much better skiers than I am. Until recently, though, I always assumed the combination of these qualities was unique to me. That is, until I reviewed my 23andMe genetic profile. Those of you familiar with this tool likely know that one of its offerings analyzes an individual's DNA against over 2,000 traits possessed by our Neanderthal ancestors. Now, these aren't just characteristics like larger head size, they actually include personality traits. I have no idea how they know this, but they say they do. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that I possess two particular variants for which I should credit my great-grandparents to the 1600th power instead of claiming them solely as my own. The first, the trait of being less likely to have a fear of heights, mountains, skiing. The other, the trait of being less likely to blush easily, my wipeouts. The truth is, though, we all possess unique genetic coding that links us back to our particular ancestry. But perhaps you will be as stunned as I was to learn that all of us alive today can trace our maternal line back hundreds of thousands of years to one woman in Eastern Africa, the original Eve, as it were. Which means that we are, each and all, inheritors and carriers of some tiny part of her genetic makeup. Just think about that for a moment. That of the thousands of generations between then and now, somehow there exists a single root that winds and weaves its way up and across every generation, all the way to each and every one of us right now. It's breathtaking. Of course, this idea of being connected back in time sits at the heart of one of our most cherished Jewish ideas, the notion you know of Lador Vador, our connectivity throughout the generations. Often at B'nai Mitzvah services, we invite the immediate family members present to pass the Torah down to the B'nai Mitzvah student. Just before this happens, I often invite the student to first look at the family members standing with them on our bima, their parents, God willing, their grandparents. And then I ask them to imagine the line of their family extending back much farther, as if their great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, all the way back to those who received the covenant at Mount Sinai, were standing there with them too. Mindful of this incredible line of tradition, when the Torah is placed into their arms, I hope they really feel their place as the next link in our unbroken chain. But you don't need to be celebrating a B'nai Mitzvah to feel this. This morning's Torah portion, Nitzavim, will personally invite each of us to feel our place in that very same line today. You stand this day before Adonai your God to enter into the covenant. I make this covenant with those who are standing here with us this day and with those who are not with us this day as well, it reads. We likely assume that those who are not with us refers to the generations before ours. But rabbinic commentaries take a much more expansive view, noting that those not present includes not just generations past, but also the generations yet to be. Somehow, they are here too. This then invites us to expand our sightlines. Here now, we stand not only as the descendants of generations, taking us back to the very beginning, but also and at once as the ancestors of all of those yet to be, the branches and blossoms yet to sprout. So the question upon which I'd like us to reflect this morning: we know what we've inherited from the past. What is it we will give to the future? This day, what kind of ancestors do we want to be? So what kind of ancestor do you want to be? The immediate response to this question, I think, should be a good one. But actually being a good ancestor requires both focus on the intention and then acting in accordance with it. So it's Yom Kippur. Take a moment to honestly consider your recent actions. How much was even the impact of the near future a consideration? If you're like most people, probably not that much. Perhaps you, like me, found yourself continuing to look down at your phone while a loved one was asking you a question or saying goodbye for the day. Perhaps you made a business decision that favored this quarter's bottom line over a more sustainable, albeit expensive, investment. Perhaps you lost your temper over something that felt significant in the moment, but realized later was not that important at all. We may want to be good ancestors, but living in a way that fulfills that desire turns out to be anything but easy. And as it happens, there are good reasons for that. First off, we are notably short-sighted when we even try to visualize the future. Why? Because our brains use our present experience and knowledge to color everything we imagine. Consider the 1962 cartoon series, The Jetsons. Raise your hand if you remember The Jetsons. Thank God. Okay. Imagining family life in the far-off future of 2062, so that's just 40 years from today now, the best Hanna-Barbera could do was to depict the Jetson family with robotic housekeepers that still wore aprons and funky-shaped televisions that still had antennas. Our natural place of comfort, no less our frame of reference, well, that tethers us to the here and now. We've evolved this way because the here and now mindset is what enabled the earliest forms of Homo sapiens to survive. Futurist Ari Wallach offers this example. If you were walking along 30,000 years ago and saw a bunch of berries, you didn't just eat a couple and presume more would come eventually. You ate everything because you understood you needed to take immediate advantage of what was in front of you. Long-term thinking was a luxury that the short-term demands of ancient existence, namely survival, could not indulge. And this fixed the here and now as our default setting, as it were. And even though life today proves very different, still times of urgency and upheaval trigger those very same instincts in us. We are living in and through incredibly challenging times, where everything from the large to the small feels both in flux and of ultimate consequence. This leads us to follow in our ancestors' pattern. We too assume our long-term thinking is a luxury, that the short-term demands of our existence, what feels like survival, should not indulge. Or so we tell ourselves. On the one hand, the challenges we are facing, they are expansive. And because we find ourselves in a period of rapid change, even our concepts of what it means to be a human being are being called into question. It feels threatening to us because it is. On the other hand, experts agree there are no simple ways for us alone to fully address these sweeping challenges, whether it be issues of injustice or climate change, toxic polarization, or the violence that plagues us locally, nationally, and globally. The list goes on. We can't just eat all the berries on the tree and think everything will be okay. These matters will take more than our common standard measure of one lifetime to resolve. And that means we have to override our default mindsets. So what if we could expand that standard measure beyond one lifetime, across generations, with what Wallet calls transgenerational mindset? Well, then we'd be freed from the limits of short-term focus, engaging what he calls the Longpath view instead. To be clear, this is not advocating kicking the can down the road to the next generation. Rather, it's expanding the way we understand our place in the world as inextricably and at once connected to generations past and future. All of us undoubtedly owe a profound debt to the generations before us. We literally could not be here without them. And it's precisely because of that that we owe the very same to those who will come after us. This sort of transgenerational thinking is made manifest not just in modern futuristic books and writings and teachings and wisdom, but in fact in one of the Talmud's most foundational stories, often used to sum up the entire purpose of Jewish living. One day, a man named Choni was journeying on the road and noticed someone planting a carob tree. Perhaps you know this story. Choni asked, "How long does it take that tree to bear fruit?" They responded, 70 years. Choni replied, "Are you certain you'll live another 70 years?" They answered, "When I arrived in this world, I found fully grown carob trees waiting for me. As my ancestors planted those for me, so too do I plant these for the next generation." Wallach again. A lot of people think the way you change the world is through policy and government. And while that's true, what no one wants to talk about are the human interactions that transpire moment to moment. These moments may feel too small to fully capture their significance in a world of big data and big ideas. But I can tell you that the thousands of micro intentions you have every day, those are what are going to steer the ship of Homo sapiens where we want it to go. Put simply, to do our part in ensuring we are in fact good ancestors, we need to have the future in mind, but then focus on the small acts we can do in the here and now, the seeds we can plant today to yield better tomorrows. And then we need to actually plant them. As it happens, Longpath transgenerational thinking proves pretty fundamental to all Judaism. Remember, on the eve of the Exodus, instead of rechecking the packing lists, Moses directs the attention of the Israelites to how they should be thinking about telling the story of their plight and redemption to their children in the future. Or how about the fact that ours is a faith built around the notion of next year in Jerusalem? The mantra passed down to each and every new generation to provide a direction in which to head, but a destination that we are never meant to reach. It's the ultimate example of an ever-unfolding long path mindset. In fact, even God is described as a long path thinker. Each time we open the Ark on these high holy days, we recite the divine attributes. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. One of the qualities listed is Notzer Chesed La'alafim, which means extending kindness to the 1,000th generation. So with all that we owe to the generations past and future, let's be honest, what difference does it make to us here, now? While the Neanderthals needed short-term thinking to survive, psychologist Erik Erikson's famous research roots contemporary longer life to our long path sightlines instead. Erikson notes that people in the mid to late stages of their lives have two mindsets from which to choose: stagnation or generativity. Stagnation is indicated by thinking only about the self in the here and now. How do I feel today? What aches? Who calls me? Who ignores me? Generativity, on the other hand, involves worrying about the next generations and what sort of world we'll be leaving them. Not just our own personal next generations, but all of them, all of ours together. Turns out those who choose a generative approach, well, they not only live longer, but express a more fulfilled sense of existence, too. So picture yourself standing in an incredible line, not just of your own, but of all the generations who have come before us. Now invite your gaze in the other direction. Imagine the images of the successive generations branching and blossoming out from us just 200 years from today. Imagine your face and the faces of those you know in theirs. In a time sooner than we think, we will be their ancient past, their history. What of each of us will they carry in themselves? Looking back, what will they think and say of us? And what will we have bequeathed to them? Shana Tova. From one generation to the next, may we be inscribed for goodness, for kindness, and abundant blessing in the book of life.